Good morning. So to everyone I haven't met, hi. I'm Rebecca and I work with Yass Valley Council as a Natural Resource and Sustainability Officer, which aside from being a really long title to fit on paper forms, means that I provide advice and support to Council to try and to help us to make good environmental decisions. But we also do educational programs with the community to encourage them to make more sustainable decisions for their households and lives as well. Before that, I was 13 years with the Murrumbidgee Catchment Management Authority and then the South East Local Land Services. And I'm an environmental scientist by training. So I was working with landholders to look after the natural resources on their property, to help them source funding and get advice for biodiversity, grazing and ground cover management projects. And while I'm a long way from being a local, I've been here since 2003, and it's been my great privilege to stay in one area long enough to see some of these projects start to come to fruition. So to start to see the river corridor looking healthier and start to see the trees growing, and it's a really good thing to see. I'd like to tell you a little bit today about the Yass River catchment as a whole. So what it might have looked like in its natural state, how it's been modified, and some of the issues and challenges in managing the river corridor and trying to make sure we get some good clean water at the other end of it. The Yass River catchment is mostly on Ngunnawal land, and in fact the word Yass comes from is thought to have come from the word Yah, which means running water. So it's a mix of grassland, woodland and forest in its natural state, although all of the catchment wasn't naturally treed. So the treeless plains, or the Yass treeless plains, are a recognised natural landscape feature. And we now know that that's natural temperate grassland. So if you'd like to see a wonderful example of NTG right in town, the pictures that you can see on the right at the top of those cliffs, that's the Yass Gorge. And there is some excellent quality natural temperate grassland there. So drop into council and we can give you a little self-tour guide booklet and you can go and experience it for yourself. So white settlement commenced in the late 1820s. Human hovel passed through in 1824 and settlement followed pretty shortly afterwards. Yass became a really well-known area for wool growing and other agriculture. And of course, as you can imagine, that brought about a great deal of landscape change. And a lot of that landscape change had to do with historic clearing. So there's been significant clearing of native vegetation since white settlement. And this has led to an overall decrease in ground cover and has changed the hydrology of the system, so how water's moving through our system and coming out the other end. So previously, in its natural state, we would have had a slow movement of water through the landscape, so slowly seeping in due to high levels of ground cover, but also due to the mix of species that we would have had of deep-rooted and shallow-rooted species in the natural ground cover. We would have had slow overland flow, chain of pond streams, and since the clearing and the land use since white settlement, we've had reduced ground cover and increased soil compaction from grazing and cultivation. And this has led to increasing the speed of the water, so faster overland flow, which has led to channel cutting in streams, erosion in gullies, streams, and of course the Yass River. So it's permanently changed the shape of the creek and rivers, and it adds a considerable amount of sediment and nutrient to the water. We also have an amount of agricultural runoff, and that can include chemicals and things like manure from stock getting direct access to the river and stream corridors. And another issue that we have in our catchment is dryland salinity. So research work in 2006 found that Yass contained 3 of the most saline subcatchments in the Murrumbidgee River. So of all the subcatchments in the Murrumbidgee, Yass had 3 of the highest, pumping out the salt into the Murrumbidgee River system. This is due partly to the geology of our catchment, but those salts have been mobilised due to land clearing and subsequent land management. So the picture that you can see on my lovely slide here is the Dix Creek site, or the open site, which has been used for many years as an example of how even low levels of dryland salinity combined with land management can lead to severe erosion. So we've had many government officials, public servants, buses of school kids come to look at this site. And if you think about all the sediment coming off sites like that ending up in the Yass River system, you can see what a significant problem it is. We also have a high amount of regulation of the water flow in the Yass catchment, so numerous farm dams and bores. As farm sizes and property sizes get smaller, each of those properties has an amount of water allocated to them that they can legally access. But it was estimated in the Yass snapshot of sustainability in 2004 that the existing water capacity is already at 189% of sustainable yield from the catchment. So that meant that even back then, there was already more water being extracted from that system than it can sustainably afford. And as Janice gave us a terrific overview of right at the start, we're going to be dealing with climate change, and we already are. So more hot days, more frequent and severe storms, more fire risk and more drought, all of which affects ground cover, natural systems, and what's going on in our river catchment. Okay, now on to the good news. We have a terrific history in the Yass River catchment of conservation activities to try and look after our river system and our natural environment as a whole. So obviously I won't cover everything that's been done because there's just been so much, but just to give you a bit of an idea of the trends of conservation activities that have gone on in our catchment. So erosion control work was beginning to be a focus in the 1940s. The Regional Soil Conservation Service office was in Yass, and they were doing quite a lot of experimental and innovative work around and about with contouring and erosion control works on streams, trying to redirect the flow away from vulnerable areas. We had, in the 1980s, dryland salinity was starting to rear its ugly head. People were starting to look at why is this salt coming out of all these sites. There was some government money focused on tree planting but also on monitoring. So there were a lot of test bores set up in that 1980s period, monitoring what was going on with the water tables in the area. Were they rising, falling? What was the salt level of them, and that kind of thing. We had our decade of land care in 1990. We have a terrifically active land care community in the Yass catchment. Lots and lots of tree planting works and erosion control work. We had the National Action Plan for Salinity and Water Quality in the 2000s. Now, because the Yass catchment was identified as being a high producer of salt at the time, we received quite a lot of government money to focus on trying to adapt and improve that situation. So there was a focus on strategic tree planting and grazing management. So trying to keep the ground cover on those saline discharge sites, trying to stop the salt and sediment washing into the river by keeping good pasture over the top of it, but also looking at strategic planting of deep-rooted species, so native trees and shrubs, and also deep-rooted pasture species on the recharge zones. So trying to stop the water from going into that system so quickly. Another example of a big funded project that we had in the Yass River catchment was the Yass River Renewal. That was also in the noughties, and it was a $1.1 million partnership between Landcare Australia Limited and the Murrumbidgee CMA. And that focused on the removal of woody weeds in the Yass River corridor and the replanting of native trees and shrubs, and also that key component of stock management. So trying to keep the stock off the site, maintaining the ground cover right on that river edge, getting rid of the compaction and the runoff, and providing alternative stock water so that you could fence off the river and still graze the areas back from the river edge. Through the drought years, there was starting to be a state government focus on ground cover management. So the Murrumbidgee CMA and Southeast LLS ran several education programs. They funded stock plan programs, also things like holistic resource management, to focus on ground cover management and minimise the damage that was done in those drought periods. So that's beneficial to the farmers because you don't have to spend so much on re-establishing your pasture, but also massively beneficial to the water quality that comes off those farms and goes into our catchment. And of course, so many projects by landcare groups, local Aboriginal groups, other community groups and organisations, all focused on protecting riparian areas, tree planting and maintaining ground cover. When we raised the dam wall, Council partnered with the Murrumbidgee CMA to revegetate and re-establish riparian vegetation to replace that was lost due to flooding. So that featured 100% funding of vegetation planting, fencing off from stock, and provision of alternative watering sources. And so the picture that you can see on this slide is actually one of those projects. So that's the Yass River in the background, and in the foreground you can see excellent maintaining of ground cover. Trees are looking pretty happy, and I really like looking at those sites and thinking how great that's going to look when we've got this beautiful native vegetation corridor going right down to the river. So we're not stopping there. There's still plenty to do, and there's lots of future activities already beginning to be in train. So we will continue the work on the edge of the water supply. The picture that you can see on your right is actually a great example. It's a Yass Landcare driven project where they've sourced funding from the Environmental Trust and Yass Valley Council to remove woody weeds, manage stock access, and strategically replant with natives. There are some beautiful big river red gums on that site, and it's actually great to see them now stretching and free of all the competition from the woody weeds, and to go back in there now and start re-establishing the ground cover and shrub species that need to be there. And it's a good example of building on past projects. So you can see on the opposite riverbank, you can see some baby trees starting to get going. That's one of our landholders that participated in our dam wall raising, riparian revegetation project. So we did that side of the bank at that time. Now the landholder on the other side of the bank is keen to be involved as well. So we're looking at restoring the environment on both banks of the river, which is just so wonderful to see. We also participate in the Water Watch program. We love citizen science. So there are several monitoring points on the Yass River, right from the headwaters down to the Murrumbidgee, and council contributes to providing that data. We've been involved in that for quite a few years now, and it's something we're really happy to do, not least because it gets me out of the office at least once a month. Our land care groups are still terrifically active. They're still carrying out tree planting and pasture management, but also things like climate change and farming and climate change. And they're also doing that really key element of education and awareness raising. And they are able to make it so much more relevant to our local landholders and community than perhaps an organisation like council or local land services. But speaking of local land services, they're still out there providing funding for restoration and ground cover management works. They're doing targeted threatened species projects and still funding landholder education projects as well. But Southeast LLS also supports land care support staff, which is a crucial element in our region. We've still got other organisations like Greening Australia doing great work in the Yass River catchment, doing projects like the wonderful Whopper project, which focuses on the balance between conservation and agriculture, and allowing tree planting, just proving that they're not mutually exclusive. So allowing tree planting and ground cover management and profitable pastures all to exist in the same space. And of course, not to forget our private landholders. There's so many private landholders doing tree planting, excellent pasture management, looking after their natural assets, all off their own bat, because it benefits them and the environment as well. I think now that's probably about enough from me to give you an overview of what's happening in the Yass River catchment, the good and the bad. And I'll pass it over to Cougar, who's going to talk more specifically about the challenges of providing good quality water to the residents of the Yass Valley.